Welcome, seekers of the paranormal. And listen in as we dive into the eerie and unexplained. So turn off the lights as we join Dustin and Luke in exploring the unknown.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Exploring the Unknown. I'm Dustin,
Okay. I'm Luke
and we are the hosts with the ghosts.
with the most ghost.
With the most ghosts. I like that. Today we have a special guest. His name is Scott, and we actually first heard him on the Sasquatch Chronicles, Wes's podcast.
Yeah, he had some demonic entities.
Yeah, he had a lot of experiences growing up. Unfortunately, I didn't check my audio before this. We recorded this one, so my audio is a little off. But it was really good. So we can just go ahead and get right into it.
Yeah, I enjoyed this episode a lot.
Hey, Scott.
Hi, how we doing?
Pretty good. How you doing?
Good.
But yeah, welcome, man.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself, man. Your experiences and stuff.
Well, let's see. I was born in '79 in a small town in southeastern Ohio. I have a very identic memory, I guess you could say, from a very early childhood. I can remember a lot of details and experiences, and it's been like that my whole life. It's almost like a curse because you can't forget the bad stuff, right? So I can remember as early as 2-3 years old, and so I grew up in a house that was actually a carriage house or a garage at one point, that my grandfather had next to his house on the hill next, down below. My dad turned it into a house, and that's kind of where I grew up for the first 5-6 years of my life. I always had an imaginary friend, I guess you could say, from an early childhood. I remember always playing. I was an only child, so I always remember playing with somebody or something. There was always something there with me all the time. And it was comforting. It was, I mean, I know a lot of kids do that. And for the longest time, I just thought I had an overactive imagination. I really thought I had an overactive imagination. So things were really strange. I remember things would move around the house. Shadows would move. Things would disappear. I remember hearing footsteps a lot. One of the scariest things was, just about every evening, something would come and sit on the end of my bed. You could see the depression in the bed, and it used to terrify me. It wasn't a good feeling. Something would sit on the end of my bed. You could feel the bed move, and you could see the depression on the bed. And then I would get terrified, and I would cover my face up like most little kids. I'd cover my face up, and then when I'd pull the cover down, I could actually feel something breathing on my face. And I remember the first, probably 10 times I would scream and run into my mom and dad's room. And eventually it just got to a point where I got used to it, I guess. And my mom would always tell me that, there was an angel looking over me. But I didn't think that. I always thought it was bad. Throughout the years, things got gradually worse between my parents. Became very domestic. It got to a point where it was just a nightmare for me as a kid. It was very scarring to see what they did to each other, both physically and just verbally. It's kind of hard to talk about. I'm sorry.
No,
So it got to a point where my dad was actually going to shoot my mom at one point. Um, yeah, actually, I remember being a little kid and just seeing him sit there and holding the gun to her head, and there was just something horrible and not right about it all. And there's just always this really bad presence in the house, and I think it really worked on my parents. My mom eventually moves out. Um, she suffered for probably a year, just going through depression over the separation and what had all been done to her. She actually tried to commit suicide. Actually found her, um, and if I wouldn't have found her, she probably would have died. And you got to think, I'm a 5-year-old kid. I'd done been through all this, and here's my mom laying on the floor. But I strongly believe that there was something very like demonic going on in the house. But I also feel that there was something there kind of protecting me. It's kind of hard to describe. Um, it's giving me chills right now just talking about it. Sorry. And I haven't told a lot of people this. This is something that Wes and I talked about off the air, and I've told my wife, of course, and a few other people. But most of the time, I don't talk about it. So my father and I became estranged. Didn't really see him a lot throughout my childhood. And my mom moved on and remarried, and I got a great stepdad out of it. And so I reconnected with my dad about, I don't know, 20 years later. And I asked him, I said, Dad, what was going on in that house? And he goes, because I always thought I just had an overactive imagination, and Mom didn't really talk about it a lot. And he goes, there was something very bad in that house. He told me, he goes, as soon as you and your mom moved out, it would follow me everywhere. And it just about drove me crazy. And I had to sell the house almost immediately after you guys moved out. And he did. And I remember he sold the house. Um, so I also have an estranged aunt that was 10 years older than me that lived next door at my grandparents' house. She basically was my first best friend. She was my babysitter. She was, younger. So she was, 13 when I was 3. And, she was there all the time. Well, we became estranged also. And I reconnected with her not too long ago. And I asked her the same thing, what was going on in the house? And she confirmed all the strange and unusual things that would happen when she was babysitting me or over there. And she said a lot of times I would just come over there and get you to keep you from whatever was going on in that house. She said I would take you to the park or we'd walk to the store. She's like, I tried to keep you in the yard and out of the house as much as possible. She said it just felt like a dark, heavy feeling in the house. And she agreed with me. She thinks that whatever was going on in the house really impacted my parents. Um, I have very vivid memories of being scared in the middle of the night and going into my parents' room and laying on the floor. And this is going to sound kind of crazy, but I think something was trying to entertain me or play with me. Um, like the shadows would move in shapes, and it's like I understood that it was trying to comfort me, like almost like cartoon-like shapes. That was, I mean, again, I thought I had an overactive imagination, but some of this stuff is just too crazy for even a kid to think up. Um, but I would lay there at night on the floor and it would just comfort me. It's weird. I can't describe it. It's just a feeling of like something was looking over me. Um, so from a very early age, I had a lot of very strange paranormal experiences, some of which I still to this day are just so vivid. I remember a can of peas sliding across the table in front of me while I was eating my cereal one morning, and just things like that, just strange things. And again, when I talked to my mother about it, my mother, she just really doesn't like talk about it. She's a very, very religious woman. Um, she just didn't want to talk about it a whole lot. And even to this day, though, she tells me, yeah, there was something bad there, and that's why we had to go. Um, Now, to compound that even more and get even stranger, after this is going to sound crazy too, but so not only did the stuff that happened in the house that happened, and my parents separated. Well, when I reconnected with my real father, and we got talking, and he was telling me the stuff that would happen in the house and stuff. He said the very strangest thing to me. I will never forget. Now you got to think, I'm an adult reconnecting with my dad, trying to get a relationship with him, trying to understand what happened, all this stuff as a kid, just trying to have a relationship with my real dad.
Mhm.
Well, he tells me after we've talked about some of the stuff in the house and stuff, he goes, there's something else that happened that I never told you about. And I said, what happened, Dad? He's like, well, there's a big reason why I never came around and why I've always kind of been alone. He goes, I'm kind of a lone wolf, and this changed me in my life. And I'll never forget that because he used the word lone wolf, and I thought that was hilarious. I don't know why. But he said, I actually saw something that changed me forever. And I was like, because my real dad is not religious. He's an atheist. He doesn't believe in God or angels or demons or nothing. He's very logic, and he's a mechanic. All things work, together, and he understands how things work.
Mhm.
So he told me, he said that he saw, and this is again, it's going to sound crazy because all this stuff is, I feel like it's all related somehow, but maybe not. But he told me that he saw a triangle shaped craft floating about 40 feet over our house, the old house. And he
Oh, wow.
described it to me, and he said it wasn't that big. It was probably the size of, you know, 2 or 3 cars. He described the symbols on it. He described the size, the shapes, that it didn't make any noise. He's drawn it a lot over the years. He showed me some of the pictures that he's drawn of it, and they're pretty crazy looking, with this, I guess, the symbols on it and whatnot. But so I was like, okay, Dad, you're crazy. Whatever, whatever, that's nuts. And he goes, no, that's what changed me. He goes, ever since I saw that, ever since I saw that, I've never been the same. He said, I look at the world completely different. It's like somebody took blinders off me, but I don't really have a desire for any human connection. And part of me is thinking, okay, that's just you're just making this up for being a shitty dad, right? You're just making this up for never being around. But then I saw the pictures and I saw it in his face, and I could tell like he saw something, obviously, but I don't know what to believe. That may not have anything to
Mhm.
do with the paranormal activity going in the house, but that definitely had an impact on him in some way that even to this day he's not right. There's something off. Um, so yeah, see, my childhood was a little was a little weird. Um, Now, after my mom and dad got divorced, so this would have been like 85, 86. They would ship me down to eastern Kentucky, way back in the holler, to stay with my grandma and grandpa. Now, neither one of them drove. They lived on a dirt road 16 miles from the nearest town. Very isolated area. Um, I mean, it's literally in the middle of nowhere. They didn't have a phone, um, didn't know TV. They had a little radio that my grandma would listen to once in a while. I don't even think they got a phone till I was 17. Um, but I would stay with them over the summer, and had some really strange things happen there, which led me to start listening to Sasquatch Chronicles. And if I'm rambling, just tell me. I'm just
You're fine.
No, you're doing great, man.
so. So when they shipped me down there, and of course I loved it. I'm a kid. And Grandpa would take me fishing down at the river. I always thought that was the neatest thing. We'd go on these really long walks because they didn't drive, so we walked everywhere on these old back roads in the hills. And I loved going back up in the hills with him and seeing the old coal mines and seeing, all the natural springs. And he would teach me about the different plants and the animals. And it was a great time. So things started getting weird. I think it had to be the first summer. Um, he Something started getting into his chickens, and he was complaining about it. And we go out there, and I didn't see any blood or any feathers, but he said there were chickens missing. So okay. And so he decides he's going to take a piece of wire and wrap it around the handle on the chicken coop. Now you have to think, whatever was getting in obviously wasn't digging under. He didn't do anything about that. Obviously, it was opening the door. So he put a piece of wire around the handle on the door so it wouldn't open. Well, we come out the next day and the wire is off and the door is open and all the chickens are out. And he said there was some more missing. So I had to help him wrangle up the chickens and get them all back in the coop. And he gets them all back in the coop and he goes to this old shed he's got and he gets what I now understand was sulfur and he puts it around the chicken coop. And I had no idea what that meant. I assumed it was to keep out critters. But again, I didn't see any blood or no feathers, so I didn't know, if it was a mink or a fox or some kind of predatory animal. I would think there would be blood or feathers or some sign of a struggle, and there was nothing like that. So I thought that was weird, right? And so listening to some of the podcasts and stuff and other people's experience, I guess one of the things that people would use was sulfur when Sasquatch or Bigfoot would come around their property. I had no idea. I guess, and even I've heard of Native Americans using it and other people just to keep these things off their property. Well, it didn't hit me. There's a series of events that happened that all kind of, as I started listening to these shows, kind of made me realize what I was going through there was also something to do with Sasquatch or Bigfoot. My grandmother used to actually put any of the scrap food or leftovers in a big silver pot, and she would sit that pot on a stump right at the base of the holler. Right behind their house was a big holler that went straight back, and there was a natural spring back there. My grandfather ran a piece of PVC pipe out and had a big water bucket, and he would use that to water his plants and have fresh water when he needed it. So she would sit that bucket there, and I always thought it was weird. Why wouldn't you just throw it in the ditch? Why wouldn't you just throw the food in the ditch? Well, every morning we would get up and that food would be gone. And I just thought that was the strangest thing. Okay, animals, whatever, come and eat it. Well, that just started, strange. And I guess she had to know more than what was going on. Well, one night we're sitting there, me and her, we're sitting on the front porch. I don't know, I don't even know where Grandpa was. He's probably asleep or gone. We're sitting on the front porch and it's getting late. And Grandma would never let me go outside. None of us kids. She never let us go outside at night. Her words were, "The booger will get you. If you go outside at night, the booger will get you." And I just thought that's her way of threatening us. But we never were allowed to play out at night. We were never allowed to catch fireflies or do any of those things like, normal kids when we were there. And she would always tell us, "The booger will get you." Well, fast forward, and I started learning that a lot of people in the South call Bigfoot or Sasquatch booger. Had no idea. So my entire life, I just thought Grandma was just saying this to scare me. But then I started learning she's talking about something real. She's talking about something that other people use that same word for, right? So I started figuring out that there's some strange things going on. Now, I had an uncle that lived about a mile or two down the road, and he comes over one night. Sorry, let me back up. Grandma and I were sitting on the porch early on. I remember this, and she's got her little radio going, and we're listening to the whippoorwills. I've never heard a whippoorwill, and I thought it was the neatest thing. These birds, in the middle of the night. I thought it was cool. You could hear all the forest and everything going on. I thought it was really neat. Well, we're sitting there, and we hear this long howl type thing. It was like a siren, almost like a tornado siren, way off in the hills. And I remember asking Grandma, "What was that?" She said, "Oh, it was a mountain lion." And I didn't know what to think. Okay, Grandma, what's a mountain lion? I don't know. I've never heard a mountain lion. Well, again, fast forward years later, and I heard on one of the podcasts the famous Ohio howl. And it sounded exactly like that. It gave me chills when I heard that because we were sitting on the porch, me and her, with this little light and her little radio in the middle of nowhere with nobody around, and that was going on in the background. And I remember weird things happening. I remember tree knocks. Didn't really think about it. Didn't know what it was. I remember rocks clacking together in the woods at night. I remember hearing strange noises. It was just strange. There was a lot of weird things going on, and I think my grandmother knew more than what she wanted to lead on. Now, I haven't back to the uncle. I had an uncle that lived down the road, and he would come every once in a while and stop in and check on my grandparents. Obviously, they were older, and he's just making sure they were okay. And one night he was telling me the story, and I thought he was just trying to scare me, but he was telling me the story about what they call the Kalker. Never heard that word before in my life. Didn't know what it was. He called it a Kalker. Basically, a big, white, hairy thing in the woods that will get you if you go out at night.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was telling my grandpa about the Kalker, and they were talking about it. And of course, I'm a little kid. I'm scared. I'm intrigued. I'm listening. And he said that the logging crew or whatever they were down from his house had gotten run off by the Kalker. Some big white thing came out of the woods and screamed at them and scared them all off. They left all their equipment and took off. And that had just happened, I guess, not too long before he arrived at my grandparents. And my grandpa was like, yeah, gotta watch out for it. And that was about it. He didn't say anything, or he just said, you gotta watch out. And I asked my uncle, what's the Kalker? And he's like, well, no one really knows. It's just this big white thing in the woods. He's like, your great grandpa talks about it, following him around and stuff like that. So I got kind of a introduction to it that summer, right? That summer was kind of like, okay, there's obviously more going on here than what they're really telling me. Well, I go back home and I asked my mom, we're back in Ohio, and I asked my mom, it's like, Mom, what's the Kalker? And she's like, I don't know what it is, but when I was a little girl and I would stay with my cousin, she lived next to this creek, not far from where my grandparents lived at the time. She said we would lay in bed at night and we always knew when it was coming through because the dogs would all go hide under the porch. And she said you could hear it in the creek turning over rocks, and it was loud and it would make weird noises. But no one ever went out at night. She's like, we would lay there just terrified, listening to this thing going up and down the creek.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, what is it? And she's like, I don't know. She's like, some people think it's a big white mountain lion. And I'm like, why do people think it's a mountain lion? Are there even mountain lions down there, let alone white ones, So she kind of blew it off. Again, my mother's very religious. She didn't want to talk about any of that. She definitely wouldn't accept anything other than it was just a natural animal. So then I go back the next summer. So this would have been like 86, 87. And I'm staying with grandma and grandpa. And, my grandfather used to run fishing lines across the river, the Kentucky River, the East Fork of the Kentucky River. And they were trout lines. I don't know if you guys know what that is. Basically, you just run a string across the river, connect it with two trees, and you run a bunch of hooks with bait, and you weight it down with rocks, and
Yeah.
you just leave it overnight and come back and you catch fish. And that's what he did. I don't even know if it's legal now, but that's what he did. So one morning he wakes me up really early. It's just before sunrise, and he says, "Hey, I'm going to go check the trout line. You want to go with me?" And me being a little kid, I'm like, "Yeah, sure, Grandpa. That sounds cool. Let's go." I jump up. He's got his coffee in his hand, and he's like, "All right, let's go." So we start walking down the road, and it's that early morning, not quite light out yet. And we walked the opposite direction of where he normally takes me to his fishing spot, which I thought was weird. I'm like, okay, maybe Grandpa's fishing in a different area this year. No big deal. We walk way down the road, probably 3 or 4 miles down this dirt road, and we come to just a bank. And we walk over this bank down in like this little valley, this little river bottom. So you've got the road up on one side, on the right side, and then you've got on the left side, you've got a hill or a mountain, whatever you want to call it, that goes straight up. And we're kind of walking on this little dirt path that's only, a foot and a half wide, dirt little path. And I remember there was these really tall weeds, and Grandpa was in front of me. I remember it was really, really quiet, like really strangely quiet. Like you couldn't hear the river, you couldn't hear insects or birds or anything. It was just really super quiet. I mean, I could actually, see the wind blowing the tall plants next to me, and that's all I could really hear was just this light, flutter of the leaves and the plants next to me. Well, we're walking, and all of a sudden, my grandfather stops, and he turns around, and he puts his finger up to his lips, like shh, And I'm like, what's up? What's going on, Grandpa? And he reaches down, he puts his, because I'm still walking, he puts his hand on my chest. Now, my grandfather, he never touched people. He didn't shake hands hardly ever. He was not that kind of person. He never gave us a hug or anything like that. So it struck me as odd that he put his hand on my chest and stopped me. And again, he said, shh. And of course, I'm just standing there really quiet, like, what is happening? And all of a sudden, we start hearing this god awful noise up on the mountainside, up on the hill. Something big moving around, breaking sticks, making these weird noises. Like it just sounded like a freight train was coming down the side of the mountain, just tearing things up. Like somebody was throwing a fit, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And Grandpa looks at me and he takes my shoulders and he turns me around and we start slowly walking out. And I'm like looking up at the hill. I don't see anything, but I hear this just whatever it is going crazy on the hill. So we walk out and we get back up on the road and everything's fine. It got quiet and everything kind of returned to normal. It just seemed like nothing happened. And I was like, Grandpa, what was that? And he's like, oh, don't worry. We'll come back later. I'll come back later and check that line. Let's go home and see if Grandma's got breakfast. And I just thought that was so strange. I'm like, what just happened? What was that? Well, I didn't know, but I mean, I remember smelling this awful smell, which I thought was maybe just the river or dead fish or something. The noises and the sounds, the breaking, the things I heard, how quiet it was. I didn't know until listening to other people's experiences that happens a lot when Sasquatch is around or Bigfoot. Had no idea till years later. I just this was just a memory that I couldn't relate to until I started listening to other people's experiences. So, we get back to the house and everything's fine, and Grandpa doesn't say anything. Well, it was later on that week that we used to go up and see my great grandfather. My great grandfather lived up on a big hill. They had a original farmstead there up on the hill, and he was still alive. Of course, when I was 6, 7 years old, he was already up in his 90s, in pretty rough shape. But we would always go up and see him, and my grandmother's brothers, and they all kind of hung out and lived up in that area. So we would go up there and see him. So we go up there, and I'm sitting there actually on the couch. My grandfather had this little old chair he sat in next to this old wood stove, and it was a very rustic house. I mean, they still cooked with a wood stove and everything. They had, my great grandmother had this old stove in the kitchen that was still there. Of course, she'd been dead for a while. Excuse me. Still got kind of some of that sickness going on from last week. So we're sitting there, and this house full of people, and great grandpa, I loved going up there because he'd always give me a little case knife, and he'd always give me a 50-cent piece every time I saw him. Kind of regret not hanging on to some of that stuff. It's probably worth a fortune now, but we're sitting there, and I asked him straight out. We were sitting there, and I said, Grandpa, this is my great grandpa. I said, Grandpa, what's the Kalker? And like I told Wes, it was like a needle record, when someone walks in the bar, it just totally got quiet in the house. Like you could hear a pin drop, like everybody in the entire house just went completely quiet. Mm-hmm. Now my grandpa was losing his sight in one eye, and like I said, he was getting up there in age. But I remember he leaned forward, he got close to me, and it still creeps me out to this day. He said, the Kalker is big, it's white, and runs faster than any man could ever run. He goes, it would always follow me, but the only way you could see it is if you look out of the corner of your eye, and it would lean out behind the tree. He goes, and that's why we never go out, because the booger will get you. Go out at night, the booger will get you. And then he just kind of gives me this creepy little laugh and just leans back in his chair, and everybody returns to normal. And I'm sitting there like, holy crap, what just happened? It's like a scene out of a movie. Grandpa just, he just, oh my God, it's hard to explain. Like it literally happened that way. And I remember just being terrified of going out at night after that. Even when I came back to Ohio, I was terrified to go out at night for a long time because I was just all this stuff I would hear down there and experience down there. So I still to this day had no idea, like, what the Kalker was. So as I was talking to Wes, and he told me, he goes, I've only heard that term. It's a very interesting term. He said, I've heard them called boogers or wood boogers, all this other stuff, but I've only heard Kalker one other time. And he goes, it was from a little old man in West Virginia, and he called it the Kalker. And he was like, well, what's that? And he said, Sasquatch, Bigfoot. And I'm like, wow, that makes me feel better that, someone else has heard the term, because I thought it was only in my small, tight knit family down there in the hills of Kentucky that used that word. But apparently it's pretty common too for Southern people. Not as common as booger, but I don't know where the word comes from. I don't know. I'd never heard it anywhere else. You can't Google it. You can't find it anywhere. But it's a word that they use to describe whatever this big white thing is down there. Now, I had tried to do some research and type in white Bigfoot in eastern Kentucky, and apparently there have been several sightings. In fact, I found a YouTube video of a man talking about seeing a white Bigfoot in eastern Kentucky. And of course, we all know about the white Bigfoot in Pennsylvania. That's that video. But I just never, I didn't even know there were white ones. I had no idea until I started listening to some of these podcasts. I didn't even know if you could have a white Bigfoot. I always thought they were black or brown and they lived in Washington State, or, I didn't know they were here. I didn't even know they were in Ohio. And apparently Ohio is a very hot spot too. Actually not far from where I live here in Ohio now. I guess it's a pretty hot spot. But either way, that was some of the strange things that happened to me as a kid. My childhood was very unusual. Let's put it that way. Now, as a young adult, I was always fascinated and obsessed with the paranormal, but I never experienced anything. I even dated a girl that was a paranormal researcher. She drugged me around in my early years to all these different paranormal places all over Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, the Mansfield prison, all this stuff. I've been everywhere in the middle of the night, never heard or seen anything at all weird. Like, always wanted to, but I never experienced anything, right? So that's why I always thought my childhood was just an overactive imagination, because I couldn't experience anything as an adult. Now, I know people have their theories about children can see things that other people can't and whatnot, but I just hadn't seen anything as an adult. And I'd probably been to all the scary, haunted, crazy places in the tri-state area and still was disappointed I hadn't seen anything. So I've always been fascinated, though. So if you fast forward in my life to now, I'm living in Ohio, married to my wife. We got 2 kids, and so 2022, right? So 2022. So last October, I was taking my daughter to her choir recital, and my wife stayed home with the little guy. We got a toddler, and he doesn't do well at certain functions. He's just loud and rowdy, and it's hard to take him. So she stayed home, and I took her to the recital, my daughter to the recital. And after the recital, we were driving home. It's probably about 9:30 at night. It's dark. It's October. We're driving down the highway, and this is when I see something that I still can't explain to today. It's the only thing as an adult that I can say that I've seen that I can't explain. So we're driving. Like I said, it's about 9:30 at night. No other cars on the road, really. We get about a couple miles outside a little town that we live, heading toward where I live, outside of town. And I see this thing, this big dog-like thing, run across the road. It's. I've got a newer car. My headlights are pretty bright. I got a really good look at it. My daughter, being a teenager, she's on her phone, and I'm like bumping her, like, look, look, look. And she looks up, and she just barely catches it. And I was like, what was that? And she just says, big dog. And I'm like, that was not a big dog. That was huge. So I remember it reminded me of kind of like a big chow dog. It had a big mane. It had tall, pointy ears, a big muzzle like a German Shepherd. but it moved so unnaturally. Like it seemed like it just flew across the road in a matter of seconds. I mean, it probably covered 100 yards within 3 or 4 seconds. I mean, it just so fast, incredibly fast. Now I've been in the woods my whole life, seen all kinds of animals, never seen anything like this, let alone move like that. Not that fast. Now I can imagine, like what a cheetah would look like when it's running full speed, or like what, I don't know. I've never seen anything move like that. But what was weird is that it was so fluent. It was just, it moved like all the power was coming from the lower legs. There was no real shoulder muscle movement. And you could see this thing was very muscular, very big, dark brown or black fur. Like I said, kind of a shaggy mane around, these big ears sticking up. And it covered that space just in a matter of, like, if I hadn't been paying attention, I would have missed it. I wouldn't have seen it. It was that fast. It came up out of a dry creek bed on the left side of the road, ran across the road, and disappeared into a field just on the other side of the road. Now, I went back out there sometime later. I was terrified, honestly. Well, I wasn't really scared when I saw it, but I was more scared when I got home and I realized it was only like 10 minutes from my house, right? That's when I started getting a little nervous. And I told my wife, of course, and she's like, "Oh, okay, you must have seen a coyote or wolf or whatever." She's like, "Oh, okay." She kind of blew it off, like, whatever. But in my mind, it looked exactly like the old werewolf movies. It looked exactly like something you would see in, American Werewolf in London. That's what it looked like to me. And it creeped me out. And so I went back out there sometime later, and there was a construction sign still there where they were working on the bridge. It's not far from there. And I was measuring, and I'm like, oh my God, this thing had to be almost 4 feet at the shoulders, which means, based on me seeing it and judging, growing up on a farm and seeing different animals, I can tell you this thing was probably 400 or 500 pounds. It was
Wow.
massive,
Like it's big.
massive. Yeah. And I asked my daughter, I was like, "Hey, you remember seeing that big, dog thing?" And she doesn't remember it all. Of course, she's like, "No, I don't remember, Dad." I was like, "Remember you told me you saw a big dog?" And she's like, "Nah, I don't remember." And I'm like, "Oh man, I wish like just someone else could confirm, hey, I saw this thing." Well, it gets even weirder than that, and this is going to sound completely strange and crazy, but like I told Wes, it's true. After I saw this thing, a couple weeks after I saw it, I've always heard about Dog Man and listening to podcasts and stuff. I never thought I would see anything like that. Like I was always like, oh, I want to go see a Bigfoot or I'm going to see something paranormal. But I never imagined, like in my own drive home, that I would see something like that. And I've always heard stories about people who see these things who say that they follow them home or they have dreams or nightmares. Or I didn't really have nightmares per se. I mean, yeah, I was a little disturbed by the whole thing, but not like, terrified, not scared. I didn't get this sense of dread like people talk about, but I did start having some very strange dreams, and I don't know what it means or if it's even related, but I keep having these dreams, and I'm still having them even to this day, and they just seem to get a little darker and a little darker each time I have them. They're less often now, but I dream where I'm me and my family is there, but they don't look like my family. My son doesn't look like my son. My wife doesn't look like my wife. My daughter doesn't look like my daughter. We have all different friends. We're living in a different house. We're doing different things. But it all seems very familiar to me. Like I know that that's my life. Like it's very real. And they say you can't dream about faces you've never seen. Well, I can tell you I have. It's not from browsing on Facebook or TV or movies. I've seen faces that I've never saw before and places I've never saw before. And it's these weird reoccurring dreams, and it just makes me wonder, why did I start having these dreams after I saw this thing? I never had a dream like that before in my life. Now I've had nightmares and I've had strange dreams when I was a kid, especially in the house that I grew up in. I had some very strange dreams, but nothing like this was just completely random. And I would wake up and I would tell my wife about it, and she's like, "That's strange, maybe you're watching too much TV." I'm like, "But it's not, it doesn't have anything to do with TV. It'd be different if I was dreaming about aliens or monsters or weird things, but I'm not. I'm just dreaming that I'm someone else, and it's very comfortable. It seems like it's my life, and that each
That's interesting.
it's strange. And when I say darker, I mean like, we're standing on a beach and with my kids, and they don't look like my kids, but I know they're my kids, and we're friends that I know that are my friends, but I had never seen them before, and a dead body washes up on shore. It's just random things like that just it's strange. And again, I don't know if it's related. I don't know if it has anything to do with it, but it definitely is new. It's different. I can't explain it. Um, so yeah, so there's a lot about my life in a very short amount of time. Sorry if I was rambling, but that's
Yeah,
that's
you're good. Now,
Yeah.
the thing with the whole big pot thing that your grandma used to do,
uh-huh.
it's weird. I mean, I shouldn't say it's weird, but it's different because I have a cabin up in the middle of the mountains, and like you said, you throw your scraps just out and not put it in a pot, which seems to me like she's actually feeding something.
Yeah, that was what I thought as well, and that's what Wes was kind of thinking the same thing. I think she was gifting or feeding to keep it from getting into the chickens.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense.
I think that's what was happening. But again, she would never talk about it. I think she knew more than what she did, but she would never talk about it. She's a very religious woman too. A lot of my family down there is very religious, and they don't talk about this kind of stuff. They never did.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah, I agree.
when the next day, would the pot be still sitting in the same place, or would it be kind of like knocked off the stump, or just tipped over, or anything like that?
Oh, it would still be on the stump. Yeah,
Oh
it would
wow.
still be on the stump, but be completely empty. Wouldn't be knocked over or rolled around or in the yard. It would still be on the stump, but completely empty.
Hmm. That's really interesting. Now I have a question about
You want to
the.
tell me your experience with a white thing?
Well, yeah, that's actually
I'm sorry.
what color was that thing that you seen that went across the road that you said looked like a dog?
So that had to be a dark brown or a black.
Okay.
Probably 3 to 4 inch hair around most of its body, but you could still see the muscle under it, and a big shaggy like lion type mane around its upper head. But it was all black or like a dark brown.
That's interesting. We're from PA, and whenever I was younger, me and my pap and his friends, we would go bear hunting up in the mountains, and I remember I had an experience where they told me it was a wolf, but I seen it. I couldn't confirm it was a wolf, and none of the other people that had seen it could confirm that it was a wolf. They just assumed. But what I had seen was really big, bigger than a bear, and it was white, and it was moving unnaturally fast.
See, that's what I think that it makes you wonder because the way that I saw it move, right? It's not natural. You don't see any other animal move like that. So it makes me wonder, is this something physical? I mean, the one I saw was physical. It impacted the environment. I could see it moving the weeds and, going
Mm-hmm.
through the grass. But it makes you wonder, like, how can it move that fast?
Right. Had you found any
Hmm.
tracks or anything?
No, actually, I looked. I actually walked down to like the creek bed and everything to look for tracks. But it'd been a little while. So whatever would have been there. I mean, it's rained a lot, and there probably wouldn't have been anything. And most of the area is grass. Um, but I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find any evidence other than you know the sign and measuring where it was. In fact, there are 3 or 4 old stone pillars that are about 5 feet tall. I guess they used to be part of an old farm fence there, um, And same thing, like measured those, same thing, because the sun wasn't there anymore. Same thing. It had to be almost 4 feet at the shoulder. So we're talking big. Now, I never saw it stand up on two legs. Part of me wishes I did see it stand up on two legs, but then I think that would scare me more. I don't know. Like, I think that would terrify me more, knowing that I don't know. Part of me wanted to see it stand up, but then part of me didn't. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I get it. You want to see these things, but it's like, if I see it, how am I going to react to it? Because I'd like to think that I'd be okay with it, but really, I might not be okay with it.
And that's the thing with like Bigfoot, right? I've always wanted to see Bigfoot. I was that kid that checked out the Mysterious Monsters book at the library and saw the picture of Patty and the Loch Ness Monster and all that stuff when I was a kid. So I've always had an interest, and I've always wanted to see it. But ever since I saw this thing, I don't know. Like, I've been invited to go out and go on like Bigfoot expeditions here in Ohio, and in the back of my mind, it's going to sound strange, but the back of my mind, I keep getting this feeling like, if you come looking for us, you will find us. I don't know why, and that terrifies me. Like, I've never, I never would have thought, hey, let's go out in the woods and, just listen, and it'll be fun. But part of me in the back of my head's going, yeah, no, I keep getting that feeling like if I go looking, I'm going to find them. And I've actually spoke to the BFRO here in Ohio, and they invited me out and some other people, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know how I would process that, but I have this feeling like if I go, I'm going to see something. And that's, there was a sighting not more than 8 miles from my house here. It was a daytime sighting. A sheriff saw three, 2 adults and 1 little one playing in a creek bed in the middle of the day. That the BFR told me about, but they didn't. I don't think they reported it because I guess it was a sheriff that saw it, and that was 8 miles from my house.
Oh wow!
And part of me wanted to go out there and drive down that road because he told me where it was, and I wanted to go. But part of me's not. Part of me's like, how would I process that? What would I do if I really did see it? Would I become more obsessed, or would I become more frightened?
Yeah. I think if I would go, I would definitely take somebody with me. I wouldn't go alone.
Oh yeah, no, definitely not. No, and I would go armed. I would not go unarmed. Even though I don't think that would probably do much. I think you'd have to have, and then there's always the thing that, okay, what if you did shoot one and there's probably another one right there? You always hear these stories. There's always more, you shoot one, the other one's going to kill you, Heard lots of those stories. I've heard stories about, the guy that used to take out, he was, what do they call that when they take out people hunting? Not a trail guide, but
Tour guide, hunting guy.
yeah, like a hunting guide. He would take out doctors and lawyers and all these people, and he would take them out, and they would go out and hunt elk or bear or whatever. And he was telling this story on one of the podcasts I heard about how they came up, walking quietly through the woods, just him and this doctor or lawyer, whatever it was, and they're walking through the woods quietly, and all of a sudden they look up and here's this female Sasquatch in a tree right up in front of them, and the doctor or lawyer or whatever points his gun at it, and before the guy can stop him, he shoots it. Well, within seconds, I guess there was a large male, probably 8.5, 9 feet tall, just standing not far from them, that just came over and pulled the guy's head off like a grape.
Holy crap!
Instantly.
Oh wow!
And so he took off and went back and got the sheriff and the coroner and all that, and they came back out, and the guy's body had been mutilated, and they said it was a bear attack. And he's like, no, this was not a bear. And he's like, no, it was a bear. And he was told it's going to be classified as a bear attack. And the coroner looked at him like, yeah, you should probably just say this is a bear. And he wouldn't even give his name, I guess. He was just, that was a story I heard. I was like, oh my gosh, wow. Could you imagine just being that guy, witnessing that happening just feet from you and making it out of there alive, only to come back and be told that was a bear? Yeah.
That would be traumatizing, I'd say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I hear a lot of stories where they're like encounters with Sasquatch or Bigfoot. They're not real aggressive, or they're not aggressive at all until you or whoever's having the encounter shows some form of aggression, either by having a firearm or you know what I mean.
Yeah, like the so I think that they know what guns are. I think they pass down knowledge like Native Americans, verbal history. I think they know guns are bad. I think they can identify what a gun is. I think they know that if they kill one of us, that 20 more of us is going to come looking. You know what I mean? I think they've learned over the years to stay away from us because you know, we're going to shoot them. And that's why they're so good at hiding. They're just masters of their environment. And I think that they evade us at every chance they've got. And I think they have heightened senses and they can smell us coming from a mile away or hear us coming or I, but I definitely think they know what guns are.
Yeah, yeah, I think they're rather intelligent.
I agree.
But yeah, man. Um, did you have any other experiences you'd like to share with us?
No, no. So the only other weird thing that's happened in my adult life is the building I oversee um, has some strange things happen. Women talk about their hair being pulled or their shoulder being touched. More paranormal stuff, I guess. In fact, I've got a video footage of something walking around about 2 or 3 o'clock in the middle of the night. I'll have to send you, see
Oh
if I
man,
can
that'd be
find it
great.
and send it to you. It's really creepy. It's a shadow or something walking around the middle of the night when no one's there. Um, and there's all this, stories people talk about seeing shadows or actually had a third shift guard quit because he said that he was using the restroom in the middle of the night while no one was there, and the handle on the bathroom stall shook violently, and I guess it scared him really bad, and he left that next morning and never came back.
Wow.
Um, so I don't know. I haven't. I've heard what I thought was laughter in some of the back parts of the warehouse. I've heard some strange things. I never seen anything other than the video. Um, Years ago, I guess the building was a different company, and my cousin worked there, and he told me a story that um, part of the warehouse was used for storage, where they put a bunch of the old shelving and stuff like that. And it was the middle of the day, and they heard this awful racket back there, and like something tipping over the shelves and making all this noise. And they didn't see anything, so they called the police, thinking that maybe somebody got in and was hiding out back there. And the police come in, they've got a guard, a police dog with them, and they're looking around, they don't find anything, but the dog goes underneath the shelf and dies right then and there.
Oh wow.
Wow.
And come to find out years later, that's the building that I'm in now. So there is some strangeness going on in the building that I have now. But I don't know. Like I said, I've heard some things, I've seen some videos, but I don't know. And I don't know what the history is of the building. I've heard it was a farm and that the farmer hung himself, and I've heard all this different stuff. I had a vendor come in one time. This lady came in and she said, we were talking, and she goes, "Yeah, I used to work here a long time ago, third shift." And she was telling me, she was asking me if I knew any of these people, and obviously I didn't. And I said, "I got to ask you something." She's like, "You mean about the shadow people?" And I said, "What?" And she goes, "Yeah, the shadow people. We would see them all the time." And that really creeped me out. I'm like, "Well, I've heard other people talk about it, and I've got a pretty convincing video, but I didn't know anybody else knew about that stuff." She's like, "Oh yeah, no, it was normal. Lots of weird stuff happened in this building."
Oh
So
wow.
that's really the only other paranormal type thing that's happened to me as an adult. But yeah, I'll have to send you that video and let you tell me what you think.
Yeah,
I
absolutely. And
definitely believe this paranormal.
And part of me believes that it's all related, right? I think I okay, so not really a big religious person, but I think that all of it's related somehow. I think that, you know, Bigfoot, Dogman, aliens, demons, paranormal activity, I think all of it's related somehow. And I don't know. I don't know how to describe it, but I think it's all in some way related. I've heard all these
Mm-hmm.
different crazy theories. I've heard all kinds of different theories about different dimensions and all of Ron Moorhead's theories, which I love listening to the man talk. The guy's incredibly smart. Um, but I don't know. I think it's all related somehow. And I do believe that there is a demonic attribute to it in some way, right? I think it's all somehow something's we're not meant to understand.
I
Yeah,
would agree with you on that.
yeah. Deep down, I feel like maybe somebody
Or
out
maybe
there
we just
knows.
oh yeah, don't get me started on the government conspiracy because I really really believe that.
We can do another episode on that because we have some government conspiracies too. So we can always do another episode on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I've got when you got to understand too. I've been researching and listening to these, thousands of stories and reading books and watching videos and pictures and analyzing all this stuff of different things over the years. And I've got all these conceived notions in my head, but none of them really make sense, right? We're all trying to figure out what's going on or what, none of it makes sense. And
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to, Bigfoot, which I'm obsessed with. You just, everybody's like, oh, why don't we have a body or why can't we find it? Well, put things into perspective like a black bear. Okay, here in Ohio, black bear is very rare. You may have one every 100 square miles, right? Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
What's your chances of seeing that black bear?
Yeah, slim
Slim
to
to
none.
none. Yeah. And what's your chances of ever finding a body of a black bear?
Yeah,
You
I'm
don't.
more right on that.
Yeah. I mean, so if you have an elusive, highly endangered species that is capable of avoiding us at all costs, that's intelligent, I mean, we're never going to. I mean, it could walk right through your backyard and you'd probably never know, or it could be standing 10 foot off the trail. And if it doesn't move, you probably wouldn't know it's there.
Yeah. I've
Yeah, I
heard.
have like I said, I have that cabin up in the mountains, and I've been hunting for years, and I've never seen a black bear. I mean, they're up there. People shot them. My grandma saw one walk right down the driveway, but I never seen one. It could be like the same as Bigfoot. Like you just have to have the right timing.
It's,
Mhm.
where did I hear? Someone was telling me that they did an experiment. I don't know if it was out west where they dressed the guy as a Bigfoot. They put the costume on him, big guy. They put this costume on him and they told like 25 or 30 people that if you can get a picture of him, then you win like some money, right? So he goes out and they're out in the park and they're looking for him. And he said at one point he actually did that. He actually just stood like 10 foot from the trail and these people would walk right by him. And he thought it was hilarious. The only person that managed to get a picture of him that day was a little old lady taking a picture of a cave. And she wasn't even part of the group. She was just taking a picture. She was a tourist. And he was actually waving in the picture just because no one else could see him or catch him on camera. I thought that was pretty crazy, and that's just a dude in a suit. It's
Yeah,
it's, it's
that's
funny
wild.
to think that way.
Yeah. It
I
just
mean,
goes to show how
again,
much we
like
miss.
if you give me an hour head start in the woods, you're you're probably not gonna find me. I mean, Rex could be the same with Bigfoot too.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And you got to think if they're in their natural environment, it's like any animal, right? If you reindu, you put a pig out in the wild, they go back to that feral state.
Hmm.
They start reverting back. Dogs, same way, feral dogs. I would think it'd be the same for humans or any intelligent animal. Once it's reintroduced or it's living in that natural environment for so long, it's going to adapt and it's going to be able to hear. And I mean, just even if you go out camping for a few days in the woods, you start hearing and
Hmm.
smelling, and your senses start heightening because we're so overwhelmed with technology, lights, media, all this stuff. Our senses are so dulled.
I definitely agree with you on that one.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't think I have any more questions or anything. Your encounters are very compelling. It's very very interesting. I've never heard anybody call or say the word Kalker. I've never heard that until I heard you talking on Wes's podcast.
It's a very unusual word. Now I don't know if it comes from, like people have said, maybe it killed cows and they called it the cow killer, and that
Mm,
got turned into Kalker. But if you look up the word cur, cur means like mangy dog, right? Or mangy, that's what a cur is.
hmm
So I don't know. It's a very unusual word, and I've only heard it down there in those hills.
In the Ohio How, I couldn't imagine hearing that in person. I've heard it on the podcast, and it's a wow sound.
And see, I didn't even know. You know what I mean? Like I had no idea while I was hearing it as a kid. I just assumed what my grandmother was telling me, that it was a mountain lion or, a bobcat. I assumed that's what it was until I heard it. And then I'm like, holy crap, I heard that right outside of their little trailer in the middle of nowhere.
It's definitely a creepy sound.
Yeah. Yeah. No, when I heard it for the first time, and then to hear that it's in Ohio too, right? That even is more mind blowing. But
Yeah.
to hear it for the first time and then know that that's very similar, almost identical to what I heard echoing through the hills. I mean, oh, and we had no car, no phone, no nothing. I mean, we were isolated.
Yeah, you want to wrap it up there? Then we can maybe have you back on again some other time and talk about the conspiracies.
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, man.
Thank you for coming on. We really enjoyed talking to you, and
Yeah.
we were very excited to have you on
Oh
whenever
yeah.
I messaged you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime, guys. I definitely, support you guys. That's great that you guys are getting started, and especially with these topics and the paranormal and all this stuff. I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. Once you guys get rolling, I'll definitely be listening.
Awesome, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
All right.
I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on, and I enjoy talking with you, and I'd be glad to do it again.
Awesome. Sounds good, man. Hey, you have a great day.
All right, you guys too. Take care.
Thanks.
All right.
You too.
Oh, bye bye.
Thanks everybody for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. I know that Luke and I really enjoyed listening to the experiences that Scott had. And if you want more of the Exploring the Unknown, don't forget to go and check out our Facebook and subscribe, like, share, all the above. You know how it is. We'll post our links down below so you can check out all of our social media platforms, and wherever you listen to podcasts, you'll be able to find Exploring the Unknown.